In 1873, people disappeared in the Louisiana bayou so often that nobody asked many questions. Fishermen vanished. Trappers drifted back in empty boats stained with blood. Folks blamed gators or bad luck. But old Mama Delphine said something worse lived in the swamp. A man who forgot he was human, she warned. Nobody listened until Deputy August Hebert found the bones. He discovered them deep in the marsh beside a dying fire. Cracked human bones piled beside a black iron cookpot. The smell hanging in the air was thick and greasy like burnt pork. Then, singing. Soft Cajun humming drifted through the cypress trees. August followed the sound until he found a crooked cabin standing above black water. Animal skulls dangled from the porch ceiling. Smoke rose from the chimney. Inside sat an old man sharpening a butcher knife. Screech, screech. You lost, sure? The man asked calmly. August raised his revolver. You Baptiste Thibodeau? The old man smiled. Been a long time since somebody called me that. Behind him, strips of meat hung drying from hooks. Human hands dangled among them. You been killing people? Asked. Baptiste shrugged. Everything eats. That ain't human. Baptiste looked toward the swamp outside. Out here, human don't matter much. August stepped forward carefully. You're coming with me. Baptiste sighed. I was hoping you'd stay for supper. Then the lantern suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed the cabin. Something slammed into August. Teeth ripped into his shoulder like an animal bite. August screamed and fired his gun blindly. The shot flashed bright for an instant, revealing Baptiste crouched over him with blood running down his chin. August grabbed the butcher knife and stabbed upward. Once. Baptiste staggered backward, clutching his stomach, smiling even as blood soaked his shirt. You taste scared, he whispered. Then he fell through the porch railing into the swamp below. Splash. Thuds. The sheriff searched for Baptiste 3 days, but the swamp gave nothing back. No body, no trail, just dark water and buzzing flies. After that, people locked their doors at sunset, and when fog rolled low across the bayou, some swore they still heard singing drifting through the trees. The Delacroix family lived alone at the edge of a Louisiana cane field in 1891. Their farmhouse sat miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by swaying grass and crooked oak trees dripping with Spanish moss. People said the youngest boy, 12-year-old Samuel, was strange long before the killings. He barely spoke, never smiled. Sometimes neighbors caught him staring at dead animals for hours like he was studying them. His mother blamed melancholy. His father blamed weakness and beat it out of him whenever he could. One October night, a storm rolled across the fields hard enough to shake the windows. Rain hammered the roof while thunder growled over the countryside. Inside the farmhouse, the Delacroix family ate supper in silence. Samuel sat at the end of the table, staring at his father carving pork with a long butcher knife. You gonna eat or just look stupid? His father snapped. Samuel slowly lowered his eyes to his plate. That night, lightning struck somewhere near the property, killing the lamps for a moment. The house went dark except for flashes of white light through the windows. Nobody noticed Samuel slip out of bed. The first person he killed was his father. The old man woke to the sound of footsteps crossing the bedroom floor. Before he could sit up, Samuel buried the butcher knife into his throat. Blood sprayed across the sheets while thunder drowned the screams. His mother, next. She stumbled into the hallway, holding a candle, and found her son covered in blood. "Samuel," she whispered. He stabbed her so many times the candle rolled from her hand and burned a black mark into the floorboards. His older sister tried to run outside into the storm, but Samuel caught her at the front door. Neighbors later found her body on the porch with muddy handprints around her ankles. By sunrise, the farmhouse was silent, except for rain dripping from the roof. Samuel sat alone at the kitchen table beside the bloody knife, waiting calmly when the sheriff arrived. The sheriff later claimed the boy never cried once. "Why'd you do it?" he asked. Samuel looked toward the dark fields outside the window. Because they were going to die someday anyway. The newspapers called him the Cane Field Boy. Doctors declared him insane. Priests claimed the devil lived inside him. Some believed the storm itself had cursed the child. Samuel was locked inside an asylum before his 13th birthday, but the strangest part came years later. Workers renovating the abandoned farmhouse discovered words carved beneath Samuel's bed frame. They stopped screaming after the third one. In 1912, a man named Lucien Valliere arrived in New Orleans, carrying only a black suitcase and a violin case polished like a coffin lid. Nobody knew where he came from. He rented the top floor of a crumbling boarding house in the French Quarter and paid 6 months in cash. Crisp bills that looked decades old. The landlady noticed strange things immediately. Lucien never appeared during daylight. He covered every window in thick curtains and only left after sunset dressed in dark suits, despite the Louisiana heat. Still, people liked him. He spoke softly, carried himself like a gentleman, and played violin at a small jazz club near Bourbon Street. Crowds packed the place every night to hear him. Women especially adored him. They described his eyes as hypnotic. Then the bodies started appearing. Young men and women turned up in alleyways pale as candle wax, with tiny punctures along their necks. Doctors blamed disease. The newspapers blamed morphine addicts, but the rumors spread anyway. Vampire. One night, a dockworker named Eli Broussard followed Lucien after a performance. He watched the violinist disappear into the foggy streets near the river before slipping into St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. Eli nearly turned back. The cemetery gates stood open despite the late hour, creaking softly in the wind. Above-ground tombs rose like crooked white houses beneath the moonlight. Then he heard it. Chewing. Eli moved between the tombs until he spotted Lucien kneeling beside a fresh grave. At first it looked like the man was praying, then lifted his head, blurred his mouth. A dead stray dog lay ripped open beside him. Lucien's eyes reflected silver in the moonlight like an animal's. Eli stumbled backward, knocking over a glass candle. Lucien stood instantly. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Lucien smiled, revealing teeth just a little too sharp. "You should not wander here at night," he said calmly. Eli ran. He later swore he heard footsteps directly behind him the entire way home, even though the streets looked empty. The next evening, Lucien Valliere vanished. The boarding room was spotless except for one thing left behind inside the closet. An old photograph dated 1861. In it stood Lucien, looking exactly the same. Same face, same cold smile. Not a day older. The landlady burned the photograph 2 days later after claiming she saw the man standing outside her window after midnight. But older folks in New Orleans still tell the story. They say if you walk the French Quarter late enough, you may hear violin music drifting through the fog. And if a pale man in a black suit asks whether you'd like to hear one last song, you should keep walking and never look him in the eyes. In 1884, years after Marie Laveau was supposedly buried, a wealthy banker named Henri Duplessis claimed he saw her walking through New Orleans during a thunderstorm. Nobody believed him at first. Henry was known for drinking too much and talking too loud, but he swore on his dead mother that he saw the Voodoo Queen standing beneath a gas lamp near Congo Square, wearing a white dress untouched by rain. She looked exactly like the old portraits, he said, and she smiled at me like she knew every sin I ever committed. 3 days later, Henry's vanished. The police searched the city for weeks. No ransom note, no witnesses, nothing except muddy footprints leading toward the bayou outside town. Desperate, Henry visited the only person people still whispered about when bad things happened, an old hoodoo priestess named Celeste Baptiste. When Henry mentioned Marie Laveau's name, Celeste went pale. "You should have kept walking," she told him. Henry, for help. Finally, Celeste agreed to take him into the swamp that night. They traveled by boat through black water thick with fog until they reached a tiny island hidden among the cypress trees. Candles burned everywhere, dozens of them, and in the center of the island stood Marie Laveau, or something wearing her face. Henry froze. The woman looked impossibly old and impossibly alive at the same time. Her skin seemed stretched tight like paper over bone, yet her eyes burned bright as fire. Around her stood missing people from across New Orleans. Not alive, They swayed silently in a circle, their eyes empty white. Henry spotted his daughter among them. Marie smiled. "You came asking for wealth all those years ago," she said softly. "Did you think spirits give gifts for free?" Henry fell to his knees begging for his daughter back. Marie pointed toward the swamp water. Something huge moved beneath the surface. "You owe a debt," she whispered. The candles suddenly blew out. Celeste grabbed Henry and dragged him toward the boat, while screams erupted behind them in the darkness. Henry later claimed he heard his daughter crying for him from the trees long after they escaped. The next morning, Celeste was found dead in her home with her eyes sewn shut. Henry Duplessis disappeared a week later. But the strangest part, years afterward, during a flood, workers uncovered an old tomb cracked open in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. Marie Laveau's coffin was inside, empty, except for fresh mud and dozens of melted candle stubs. In 1856, deep in the swamps outside New Orleans, 3 sisters lived alone in a rotting plantation house swallowed by vines and moss. Their names were Claire, Odette, and Marguerite Fontaine. People in nearby towns whispered that the sisters were witches. Crops died near their property. Livestock disappeared. Claimed strange lights floated above the swamp at night, while women's voices sang through the trees in a language nobody recognized. Still, no one dared confront them, until Reverend Elias March arrived. The preacher came from Mississippi carrying a Bible in one hand and a shotgun in the other. Tall and sharp-eyed, he believed the devil walked openly through Louisiana, and he believed he had found him. One evening, Elias rode alone to the sisters' home during a violent thunderstorm. He expected monsters. Instead, he found 3 beautiful women waiting calmly on the porch, as though they already knew he was coming. "You should leave this place," Claire warned softly. "The Lord sent me," Elias replied. Marguerite smiled faintly. "No. Something else did." Inside the house, candles burned green instead of yellow. Animal bones hung from strings across the ceiling. The air smelled of flowers covering something rotten underneath. "Elias, they repent." The sisters only stared at him silently. Then Odette spoke. "Do you know why the swamp fears us, preacher?" Lightning flashed outside. "Because we learned to fear nothing." The windows suddenly slammed shut. Candles flickered wildly. Elias heard whispering all around him, though the sisters' mouths never moved. The walls themselves seemed to breathe. Terrified, Elias fired his shotgun. The blast Claire in the chest. Yet she did not fall. Blood spread slowly across her white dress, while she smiled wider than before. Elias fled into the storm, screaming that the women were demons. By sunrise, half the town had gathered outside the plantation carrying torches. The sisters stood on the porch waiting. No crying, no begging, only silence. Reverend Elias ordered the house burned. Flames climbed the walls fast, swallowing the old plantation in orange light. Smoke rolled into the swamp while townsfolk prayed loudly to drown out the screams coming from inside. But some later swore the screams sounded wrong. Not. As the roof collapsed, witnesses claimed they saw dark shapes rising through the smoke like giant birds disappearing into the storm clouds. Afterward, nothing remained except ashes and blackened brick chimneys. The townspeople believed evil had been destroyed. Then the deaths began. Reverend Elias was found first. 3 days later, fishermen discovered him hanging upside down from a cypress tree deep in the swamp. His skin was covered in strange symbols carved with surgical precision. Others soon vanished near the burned plantation, and on certain foggy nights, boatmen still claim they see 3 women standing waist-deep in the black swamp water, wearing white dresses untouched by mud or flame, waiting silently for someone to come closer. In 1919, fear spread through New Orleans like floodwater after a storm. Someone was breaking into homes at night and murdering entire families with their own axes. Doors were left locked from the inside, windows untouched. Victims were found butchered in their beds while neighbors claimed they heard nothing except distant jazz music drifting through the streets. The newspapers called him the Axeman. But the strangest story came from a widow named Evelyn Broussard. She lived alone above her husband's old grocery store on the edge of the French Quarter. After weeks of killings, nobody slept peacefully anymore. Men carried church. Families nailed crosses over their doors. Evelyn, both. Still, every night she heard footsteps outside her apartment, slow, always stopping right outside her bedroom door. One March evening, the city awoke to a letter printed in the newspaper, supposedly written by the Axeman himself. He claimed he was a demon from the hottest hell, and promised he would spare anyone playing jazz music in their home the following Tuesday night. Most people laughed, but when Tuesday came, all of New Orleans turned into one giant concert hall. Jazz poured from bars, homes, street corners, and dance halls until sunrise. Everyone, music. Everyone except Evelyn. She sat alone in darkness, clutching her husband's revolver, refusing to believe stories written by a killer. Around midnight, the music outside suddenly stopped, not slowly, all at once. Silence swallowed the city. Then, the footsteps, dragging the hallway. Closer, closer. Evelyn aimed the revolver at the bedroom door as the knob slowly turned. A tall figure stepped inside, wearing a dark coat and wide-brimmed hat dripping with rainwater. His face remained hidden in shadow. "You should have played music," the man whispered. His voice sounded wrong, deep and wet, like someone speaking underwater. Evelyn, twice. The flashes lit the room for an instant. She later swore the bullets passed straight through him. The figure lunged forward with an axe raised high. Then, from somewhere down the street, a trumpet suddenly began playing jazz again. The man froze. Slowly, he turned his head toward the music and smiled. Without another word, he stepped backward into the darkness and disappeared. Police found no footprints outside Evelyn's apartment, no signs of forced entry. Nothing except deep axe marks chopped into her bedroom floor inches from where she stood. The Axeman killing stopped soon after. Some believed the murderer fled the city. Others believed something far worse. Even today, old musicians in New Orleans say you should never let jazz die completely after midnight, because somewhere in the darkness, the Axeman may still be listening. In 1847, on a sugar plantation deep in the Louisiana lowlands near New Orleans, the river air was thick with heat, sugar rot, and silence that never felt natural. The plantation was called Belle Rive. To the owners, it was one of the most profitable estates in the region. To the enslaved people who worked its fields from sunup to long after dark, it was something else entirely. A place where names were forgotten and replaced with numbers, where lashes spoke louder than voices. But there was a rumor among the enslaved workers that one day Belle Rive would burn. It began on a humid August night when the overseer, Martin Hale, went missing. By morning, his body was found hanging upside down in the cane fields, his whip wrapped tightly around his neck like it had tied itself there. The masters called it a warning from rebels hiding in the swamps. They were wrong, because the next night, the gates were opened from the inside. No alarm was raised. No dogs barked. Started in silence. The first master died in his sleep, suffocated by smoke as fire crept through his bedroom. The second was found drowned in a wine barrel in the cellar, his hands still clawing at the wood. The third tried to escape on horseback, only to be pulled down into the cane rows where the stalks swallowed him whole. By dawn, the plantation house was surrounded by flames. Inside the burning estate, something unthinkable was happening. The enslaved workers were gone, so were the overseers. Only the masters remained, and they, screaming. When the fire finally collapsed the main house, witnesses from nearby plantations said they saw figures walking out of the smoke, not running, not fleeing, but walking slowly and calmly into the swamp beyond the fields. All of them enslaved people who had been thought too broken, too tired, too beaten to resist. By sunrise, Belle Rive was nothing but ash, twisted iron, and melted glass. Every master on the estate was dead. None survived. When soldiers arrived days later, they found no bodies of the escaped workers, no trail, no camp, no sign of where they went, only a single message carved into the burned wood of the front steps. We were never proffered. We just waited longer than you expected. After that, plantations across the region tightened security. Patrols increased. Punishments became harsher. But fear had already changed sides, and in the years that followed, Stories spread quietly among the enslaved communities. Stories of people who disappeared from one plantation, only to be seen years later far upriver, free, uncatchable, and never speaking of where they had been, as if the swamp itself had taken them in and refused to give them back. In the heart of New Orleans stood a narrow, fading townhouse on Rue Dauphine. Locals called it the Marrow House, though no one remembered who named it first or why. It wasn't obviously cursed. Nothing dramatic ever announced itself there. No screaming lights, no collapsing walls, no visible ghosts drifting through hallways. Just a quiet wrongness. Over 73 years, 6 people died inside it. The first was a painter in 1949. He moved in alone, obsessed with capturing the way light behaves when it thinks it's being watched. He was found weeks later, sitting in front of a blank canvas, dead from starvation. The strange part wasn't his death. It was that all his mirrors had been turned to face the wall from the inside. The second was a couple in 1961. Neighbors reported constant arguing, then sudden silence. When police entered, they found the front door locked from the inside. The couple lay in separate rooms, both apparently asleep. They never woke up. No cause death was ever agreed upon. The third death was a child in 1978. She told her parents she had a friend behind the walls who only spoke at night. One morning, she simply wasn't in her bed. All windows and doors were sealed. The search lasted weeks. She was never found. After that, the house sat empty for nearly a decade. Then came the fourth owner, a real estate investor who insisted the stories were nonsense. He stayed only 3 nights. On the 4th morning, he was discovered sitting at the dining table with every photograph in the house turned face down, including the ones he had brought himself. The 5th death was a maintenance worker in 2003. He was repairing plumbing in the basement when the power went out. When it returned, he was found standing perfectly still in ankle-deep water, eyes open, as if listening to something just beneath the surface. He was already dead when they reached him. After that, the city quietly stopped listing the property. It was sold cheaply and quickly to a man named Elias Crow, who claimed he didn't believe in haunted houses. Elias moved in with cameras, recorders, and locks on every interior door. For months, nothing happened. No noises, no sightings, no disturbances. He began to think the house was just a story built out of coincidence and fear. Then, on the 73rd year since the first death, Elias reviewed his security footage. Every night, at 3:13 a.m., every camera in the house turned slightly, not breaking, not cutting out, shifting, as if something unseen had leaned in to look. And every night, a new door inside the house appeared open that he had locked himself. On the final recording, Elias is seen walking down the hallway toward the basement. He is alone, but the audio picks up something faint behind him, footsteps matching his exactly. The next morning, the house was empty. Front door locked from the inside.